2017 was a good year for video games. You're probably going to hear about the ones released that year well into this one. And one of those is A Hat in Time. I did an episode on Yooka-Laylee a few months ago and I felt terrible at the end of it. It left a bad taste in my mouth when I covered a platformer that was not so good and didn't follow it up with a sterling example of what a solid platformer could be. Let's fix that. Meet Hat Kid, interplanetary traveler on her way home using the magic of timepieces. Hat Kid's day starts out like any other until a rather rude toll collector ruins it. Hubris of man. Timepieces have all scattered to the world below. Fun 12-hour adventure. Go. Yeah, that's more or less the gist of why you're here collecting tiny hourglasses and fighting giant, bald centuplets. A Hat in Time opens rather abruptly, but it's enough to understand what we might be coming away with from this at the end. The burly boys of Mafia Town aren't exactly the nicest folk, and nevertheless, you're forced into engaging with them, for better or worse. But there's a subtle detail to these guys that separates them from being evil, and puts them in a much more real category. The Mafia men treat their bullying as just another fact of life. They aren't malicious, they're ignorant, and that kind of attitude towards their own behavior is one important thing. Toxic. Now, if you're coming into A Hat in Time after playing something with tight controls like Super Mario Odyssey, you might want to give it a couple of hours and a controller with rumble. Rumble is so important. Hat Kid is light. She bounces around and snaps to things sometimes in a way that can feel awful at first. There's also a lot of context-sensitive button prompts that can be finicky. Homing attacks, hook shots, they don't always show up when you expect them to or execute when you push the button. But after a few hours, you get accustomed to Hat Kid's weight and discover that A Hat in Time has really fluid platforming. The button prompts might be inconsistent, but all of your jumping and diving is responsive and snappy. You can cancel out of dives and cut the momentum on a dime, and Hat Kid snaps to surfaces for a wall run or to cling to the edge when you expect her to. But because of that snapping and the kind of physics-deprived movement Hat Kid has, the distance Hat Kid is traveling can be hard to gauge sometimes. Mario throws his weight around like a graceful Olympic diver. Hat Kid looks like the bullet coming out of a gun. Overcompensating for jumps happens pretty often, and Hat Kid's dive is too fast for her shadow to be useful in determining if she's over the platform you want to land on or not. A Hat in Time's controls take some getting used to, but its platforming shines not in how well you can adapt to it, but in how malleable its rules are. Hat Kid assembles an arsenal of hats over the course of the game that possess unique abilities. The Sprint Hat increases her running speed, and the Brewing Hat gives her an explosive attack that can break boxes and metal containers. They add to your platforming abilities, even if half of them are only needed in the specific places they're meant for. The Ice Hat doesn't get much use outside of those ice pads, for example. The real shining stars are A Hat in Time's badges. Hat Kid can pin badges to her hat that make tiny changes to the rules of her platforming. Magnetize collectibles, allow wall running after diving, remove falling damage. Badges change how the platforming works. Maybe you're not concerned about falling from too high a place and would rather have shorter cooldowns on your hat abilities. Maybe cooldowns are just fine where they are and you'd rather make your sprint even faster. Badges are an excellent catering system in A Hat in Time, a great way to balance out your own playstyle while making you aware of the risks you create out of the badges you don't have equipped. They were a controllable microcosm of what makes A Hat in Time work. The rules were always changing. A Hat in Time doesn't play like a traditional platformer. Rather than give you several worlds to trot about in, it divides everything into chapters and acts. Each act is its own level inside the worlds that chapters take place in, but each chapter is unique in how it presents its platforming. Chapter 1 is a traditional, tightly packed sandbox with a main objective in every act, while Chapter 2 is a series of linear missions consisting of set pieces in different environments. Chapter 3 has a contract-based act structure where each act unlocks and focuses on a different section of its expansive world, and all of Chapter 4 is playable in a free roam mode where all of its acts are completable from the first time you enter. It's so refreshing to step into a new section of A Hat in Time and have it operate differently from the last. Every chapter feels like a remix of the game itself and possesses a unique property the other chapters don't have. But A Hat in Time doubles down on that by not being afraid to break away from the collectathon formula. stealth sections where you have to avoid enemy sight lines, timed set pieces with small platforming challenges to conquer under pressure, and even a survival horror segment that is genuinely frightening. Oh my god, she's naked! Other small changes from one act to another, like stripping your hat powers from you, and additional requirements like forcing you to keep moving to avoid damage, makes every level in A Hat in Time memorable. I don't know any other game that has a stealth section and in face painting. Okay, let's paint a tiny plus sign on our face here. Okay, one more. Nope. No. Nope. Fuck! How the hell did I even get here? Perfect. You're able to recall most acts as their own moment in the game, set apart from the rest in its own special way. A Hat in Time never gets dull because it doesn't adhere to any specific format. Whatever cool sequence the developer wanted to make, they did. But that jump from one thing to the next still needs something consistent to string it all together and keep things from feeling like a disjointed grab bag. Each chapter tells a different story with its own cast of characters. Chapter 2 is about birds competing to win a movie award. Chapter 3 is about the Snatcher of the Forest contracting you to do his errands. And Chapter 1 is the story of Mafia Town and Mustache Girl. It's also the overarching plot of A Hat in Time. After Hat Kid crash lands in Mafia Town, she joins forces with Mustache Girl to take down the head mafia boss. When Mustache Girl discovers that the timepieces that fell from Hat Kid's ship would allow her to rewrite time and prevent the mafia from taking over her precious island, Hat Kid has to turn her down, creating a rivalry between the two to collect as many timepieces as they can. That's a common thread between all the characters you meet in A Hat in Time. They're all using you for their own selfish reasons, and most of them are holding the timepieces you need to go home as leverage. Yet they're fun to be around and are incredibly colorful. I love the Snatcher because I think he's a walking Paper Mario reference. But that's the hard-to-stomach truth about toxic people sometimes. They don't always make for bad company. You're going to meet and end up friends with toxic people at least once in your life, and you'll think they're great. But over time, they'll manipulate you, use your goodwill to involve you in their schemes without you realizing it, and you won't know any better until you learn of the bigger picture. And sometimes the trust they took for granted when you got to know them becomes the power they can use against you. All of a sudden, you're stuck in a situation you were exploited into with little wiggle room, and the only real way to get out of that is with a boss fight. Wait, I think I crossed the streams on that one? A Hat in Time's boss fights are fucking amazing. I cannot stress this enough. Good boss fights have never been something I associate with platformers or collectathons, and A Hat in Time changed that for me. Forget the rule of threes, forget repeating a single action multiple times or using the obvious ability you unlocked in the same world as the boss you're fighting. That's not here. Let's talk about constantly evolving phases. Let's talk bosses designed around the characters themselves. Let's talk demanding competency from your players. Every fight ramps up to 100 with amazing music and has story beats that push the narrative of the chapter closer to its climax. But those boss fights are very clever. That adrenaline and that rush you're getting from fighting these bosses is twofold. It's an amazing segment of gameplay, and it's the confrontation with someone who's been pushing you around. A confrontation that doesn't necessarily occur because you want it to. It's the bosses, the same characters that have been using you for their own gain, that start the fight. The inevitability with toxic people is that they eventually turn their toxicity towards you. Either because you outlive your usefulness to them or because you discover something about them that they've been trying to hide. It's a matter of time before you become the closest and easiest person to target. I don't have a segue for this one. A Hat in Time suffers from a lot of clutter. It calls itself a collectathon, which is true, but it has a lot of unnecessary collecting in it. Besides timepieces, there's 3 other pickups in the game: pawns, relics, and yarn. Pawns are used to buy badges, build display stands for relics on your ship, and unlock some of the acts in the game. Relics are collectibles that you can assemble together to complete a set that you can show off like a trophy. and yarn is used to make the hats you put on. You need at least one specific kind of yarn to make the corresponding hat, so the brewing hat needs one brewing yarn and then however many pieces of yarn extra to make it. Collecting yarn is stupid easy though. The first level has enough yarn in it to make 3 out of 5 hats in the game. You end up collecting so much yarn that you instantly have enough to make your new hat once you collect the 1 yarn you need to start. And pawns there are so many pawns. More pawns than you need, more pawns than you could ever use. Pawns respawn when you re-enter an act. Stop it with the pawns. Pawns are an overused currency in A Hat in Time. You use them for so many things that you end up feeling a need to grind for them for content that you really just want to play. This is why a hard number of collectibles in each level serves a collectathon well. Collectathons appeal to completionists, and if there's no end in sight for these collectibles, they won't feel the point of doing the platforming. At some point, pawns stop being worth the trouble because there's no end to them. Once you collect enough yarn, you're hard-pressed to do any extensive platforming sequence that ends in yet another yarn piece you don't need. It's great early on because you're doing a lot of platforming and getting a decent reward for it, but the better platforming segments are later in. Once you're not incentivized to go off the beaten path, you miss out on a lot of fun platforming challenges.
This way for the lava cake!
Don't know what I was expecting out of that. It's not without reason. Because of how flexible A Hat in Time is with its order of completion, this makes it possible to collect all your hats and badges on any route instead of having to beat a specific act to earn them. Definitely practical, but it weakens the payoff of whichever platforming challenge you complete past the point of needing any more pawns or yarns. That's why relics are so much better than either. Relics are a finite number of collectibles you can get doing the same kind of platforming sequences, but they also unlock bonus levels with extra story content. A Hat in Time has extra levels called Time Rifts. Time Rifts come in 2 varieties, blue and purple. Blue rifts are unlocked by completing certain acts in each chapter, but purple rifts are unlocked by assembling relics together into a completed set. Time rifts consist of whatever platforming you've been performing in each chapter with kicked up difficulty. They take the mechanics, strip down the visuals, and are made to be intimidating and unforgiving. Maintaining your movement is easy with these big rooftops, but try having that same confidence with these tiny, spaced out boxes. Purple rifts are a little different. Instead of stripping the visuals away, purple rifts are modeled to look like the chapters they're based in and reveal the backstory behind them. You collect pages to short illustrations about the characters in those chapters that help explain why they're so committed to being the way they are. It's in these lore pieces that we learn something valuable about toxic people, about the passive dangers they bring to ourselves. A consistent theme in each character's backstory in A Hat in Time is outside influences corrupting them. Earnest people turning into nasty people as a result of other people doing nasty things to them. Toxicity is contagious. Someone might not have always been that way, but with enough exposure and time, they can. Given time, so can you. If you hang around long enough and you let those people push you around, do or say awful things to you, and manipulate you, the frustration and stress given your situation is going to build into your own form of toxicity that can one day hurt somebody else. We can witness that happen in real time to Mustache Girl. At first your friend when you reach out to help her, but then so consumed with her own hate that she develops the same aggressive and controlling attitude she despised for years, abusing your responsibilities to get what she wants, even if that means hurting you to get it. So what does A Hat in Time suggest you do? What is the answer to dealing with toxicity? Get the fuck out! This planet with these fun but awful people isn't home. The toxic people that want to keep you in their lives don't belong in yours. There's better places to be, even if you are still a little sad about having to say goodbye. If you want to help toxic people be better, go ahead and try a few times to convince them that they need to change. There's no harm in that, but that won't always work, and you can't be a hero.
We don't need a hero! Get lost!
So leave. Get out of there. Because sticking around is only going to make you miserable. I love A Hat in Time. I think A Hat in Time is one of the best platformers ever made, and I sincerely mean that. You could say A Hat in Time is a hit. A Hat in Time excels as a platformer because it isn't afraid to stray from the basic formula. The variations and the flexibility it gives you to jump from one chapter to the next in a relatively brisk pace create a refreshing breath of fresh air. It always feels like it's flipping the script and changing how its platforming is being used without breaking the core mechanics. Amazing boss fights, great platforming, awesome cast of characters, you won't be disappointed. Give it a little extra time at the start to pick up steam, and I promise you, you're going to love it. And that's all I got today. Until next time, my name's GC. Remember that you are amazing, and keep on playing positive.